Welcome to the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies. My name is Carl Stitchin, and on behalf of the Committee of Heads of UK Law Schools and the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies, I would like to welcome you to our third and final workshop in the series aimed at academics in law schools at all career stages. In these workshops, we aim to explore a range of issues related to academic career development, including the various career development tracks, university promotion processes, and the challenges for the discipline of law, managing expectations in relation to career progression, role modeling, management succession planning, career development and well-being, the law school as a business, and models of law school leadership. Today's workshop is entitled Finding Your Own Path. Throughout our presentations, our audience members may raise questions and comments in the Q&A function. After the presentations, I will attempt to moderate the questions and comments, and you can continue to use the Q&A function throughout. I would like now to welcome our chair for today's workshop, the Vice Chair of CHULS and the Dean of the University of Hertfordshire Law School, Penny Carey. Over to you, Penny.
Thank you very much, Carl. What a pleasure it is to chair the third, but certainly I hope not the final, of these joint Institute of Advanced Legal Studies and CHULS workshops. As you said, this evening's event is titled Finding Your Own Path, exploring from three different perspectives career paths to professorial posts, which might be considered different to some of the more traditional routes, and yet clearly highly successful. To share their personal journeys, we have three eminent law professors, and I would like to introduce the first, Professor Rosemary Okmuti. Oh, I do hope I've still pronounced that correctly, Rosemary. Rosemary is Professor of Law at the University of Reading, and she currently teaches property law and gender and the law. Rosemary is a pioneer of women's studies and feminist legal studies in HE in Britain. She's a former director of teaching and learning in the law school, and she was an early fellow of the Higher Education Academy. But prior to moving into the law, Rosemary wrote widely in the areas of women's history and children's literature. And I think of particular note is that in 2017, a play based on Rosemary's legal studies article, Whatever Happened to Miss Bebb, was performed by an illustrious cast of West End actors and senior judges, including Lady Hale, no less. So Rosemary, we can't wait to hear what you have to say, and I'm delighted to hand over to you now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Penny, and thank you, Carl, for inviting me. I obviously had to think about what was non-traditional, particularly about my career, and I decided there were three things really. First, I changed subjects. I started out as a historian. Secondly, I came to legal academe quite late after, in fact, to a full-time job after mucking around doing a whole lot of things for quite a long time. And the third thing is a bit unusual, but it will resonate with Carl at least and with other people. I think I've got where I've got thanks to mentoring by a large number of people, all of whom were much younger than me. And that's because, of course, I had, like many women of my generation, done a few other things when I was young. And I think that makes my career really a bit era-specific. And so I was a little bit concerned that while I would love this romp down memory lane, fascinating always to old people, what's more important is for me to draw out things that perhaps I could generalize to other people's experience. And of course, coming into legal academe when I did as a woman, as a colonial, as someone from a new university, I came as an outsider. I think lots of us come as outsiders in one way or another, and that's still true. So what's interesting, I suppose, about my academic career is it started out in a fairly standard way. I did my first degree. I went straight into a PhD. After 3 years, I finished my PhD and got a job in an institution of higher education. but it wasn't in England and it wasn't in law. And when after 3 years in that institution in Australia, I lost my job, I first took them to court for unfair dismissal and won, and then I came to London. And I didn't come with any kind of expectation of a career. It was the last thing I was thinking about. I came to London because I wanted to be in London. And I think in that way, in that respect, that's really, I think, what was so specific to my era. And it was also, of course, because I was a woman, I think. I think even in the late 70s, early 80s, although there was no longer this idea that a woman would give up work when she married and had children. And of course, I was not remotely interested in getting married or having children. Nevertheless, there wasn't really an expectation that you'd have a career. And it was aided, I suppose, and very different from current times by the fact that it was actually quite easy to get work at the time. I don't mean academic work. I mean, waitressing and working in pubs and secretarial work. I did all those things. And then because I had been involved in women's studies, as you mentioned, in Australia, I managed to get into adult education, which was big at the time. And it was all part-time tutoring. I worked for the extramural department at London University, the WEA, practically every adult education institute in London, and then on to the OU. And then I got part-time work on the postgraduate diploma in women's studies at the Polytechnic of Central London. And so I was doing all of these things and just having a nice time when I was called for jury service. And here you see, of course, the thing that changed my life, because I enjoyed it. It was really good fun. And I was also feeling a bit bored and a bit stretched, doing a lot of work for very little money. And I thought I could just learn a bit of law and then I'd teach so much better women's studies. So I looked around for a part-time course. The only one that was available in those days, because Birkbeck wasn't doing law then, was at the Polytechnic of Central London. So I went there, I did my degree, and they gave me a job at the end of it. And I spent 18 years there. It became the University of Westminster, and went from being lecturer to being reader. And then they didn't promote me. And I looked around, I applied for a few chairs, and eventually I got one, which is the one I currently hold at Reading. So that's very quickly my life. It's specific to me, but of course, it's also not unusual for women to take a break like that for whatever reason. Lots of women will perhaps start in practice. I think we all have colleagues who've done that. They start in practice and then at some point, perhaps they decide they'd rather have academic work because it's a more flexible or more rewarding career. Or perhaps they're in some other subject. I know lots of women who've retrained. And of course, it's true of men too, I think, but largely of women, that where there is this kind of gap in their CV, which often they feel quite self-conscious about. And of course, if they haven't, I had a PhD. I was, as a matter of fact, the only person in my law school when I joined it who had a PhD. It was so unusual in those days. Of course, now it's a prerequisite. But a lot of the women I'm talking about might be coming into academia without a PhD and feeling very self-conscious about that too. So really, what I wanted to say then is, having talked about my own personal life, what I think worked for me that made it possible for me eventually to get a job that I really, really love in an institution I really like, and currently with a very good management as well. It's not always the case. So it's actually a great pleasure to work there. Because if I can draw out the things that work for me, perhaps there'll be things that will be helpful to the people who are at this workshop. And I suppose the first one I wanted to say is that wider experience is a good thing, not a bad thing. Coming from somewhere else, having done something else with your life, is something that I think all managers really appreciate. And I think I see a lot of my young colleagues who've come straight through, who really have known nothing but law school, actually, who are, I think, possibly a bit less open, a bit less empathic, a bit more fearful, actually, of different things, a bit less able to muck in where something's needed. And those are the sorts of things that actually are really appreciated in law schools. Some of my most valued colleagues are women who've come in from here, there, and everywhere, and who are actually, I think, sometimes a bit despised, looked down on by the academic high flyers, the research stars, the young people who, you know, are the expert in their field at a very young age, but actually can't do half the things that these colleagues of mine can do, and haven't actually got as much to offer. And I think that ultimately, that wide experience, it not only gives you skills, I think it does actually give you a kind of confidence that if you haven't done anything like that, you don't have. But that said, I think there's also a problem of lack of confidence for many of us, especially those who come from an outsider background as I did. And that's why I think it's really important to have mentors. They really help. I think one has to learn to look ahead. I remember the first time someone, a senior person appraising me, actually said, "Where do you think you'll be in 5 years' time?" And I realized I'd never thought about it. I was just going from day to day. That's really important. I think sometimes you can actually make a fetish out of where you want to be in 5 years' time too. So you don't want to take it too far. But for those of us who lack confidence, it's really good to have that encouragement. And I also think that I really couldn't have done the things I've done if it hadn't been for people encouraging me at different stages. Carl, for example, was the first person to encourage me to give a paper to a conference at Kiel. It was a gender, sexuality and law conference, and I didn't think I was good enough to do it. And he pressed me until I did it. And then it went on from there. There were other people who encouraged me. For example, with the last ref, 3 people wrote to me when the ref panel said, "We're looking for more women. We're looking for property lawyers. We're looking for people from non-Russell Group universities." And they all said, "This is you." And it would never have occurred to me to apply for the panel if it hadn't been for that. And so I do think it's really, really lovely to have mentors. And if we have had that mentoring, of course, it's really incumbent on us to pass it on and to do it to other people. And then the other thing that I think requires thinking bigger, like beyond just the narrow academic career, your research topic, your specialism, your specialist subject, it is that you should get a much broader sense of what the law school does, what law schools do generally. So I worry about those of my colleagues who are just desperate to give up teaching on a core subject, or who look down on people who contribute to core subjects because they just want to teach those master's students on their little specialism, and who actually only mine the same narrow niche research topic over and over again for new things, and who don't actually they just don't look beyond, do something totally different or respond to something that's going on in the world. I think those are the things that they're not only, they make you a better scholar, but actually it's much more interesting, it's much more fun. And likewise, I've had young colleagues who've said, "Oh, I don't have time to do external examining," or whatever the other task might be, because really they don't pay you enough if you do external examining. And anyway, it gets in the way of my work. And you know, I've got more important things to do. You know, one of the best things, the most interesting things I've ever done is external examining. I just love doing it, because not only do you get to see how other people do things, but you actually meet like-minded people and you learn things that will make your practice better. And you make friends, you know, you make contacts. I know conferences also do that in terms of research, although it's going to be much harder now because a lot of the networking is actually the social side. But I do think that a really broad approach and not just doing the jobs you have to do so you tick the boxes so you get promoted, really makes you a better colleague, and ultimately, you know, you will be more likely to get to the top. And finally, I think you do need to think institutionally. It's another thing I see with my younger colleagues, which is that they're so busy building their own career, which, and I do understand there are horrible pressures on young people nowadays. They do have to do so much more than we had to do. You know, they have to do this really high quality research and all these other things. But nevertheless, I think it's important to think, why is the institution or the, you know, my manager asking me to do these things? Why, you know, you might not agree with what management's doing, but there is usually a reason. And it might just be such a simple one that there's, you know, we need these students or you don't get paid, that I sometimes think we forget about. What it is we're there in law schools to do, our primary role is actually to teach. That's what brings in the money. And to start thinking, and once you can think institutionally, I think then you're much more likely to be moving into a more senior position. Final piece of advice I would have, and certainly which has exemplified my life, is to have a life. You know, have a life. Because sometimes there are some really bad experiences in your career. You're stuck with a terrible manager, you're in a middle management role where you've got all the responsibility and no power, no appreciation, all of that. Those things will end one way or another. But actually what keeps you going is if you have a hobby, if you have interests, if you have friends, if you do other things, if you carve out time for yourself, if you go on holiday. I really think that's what's made my life so interesting and made me enjoy my work so much, because I have these other things as well.
Oh, thank you, Rosemary. You could have spoken for longer if you wished, but
Oh well, I said all I needed to say.
No, that's absolutely fantastic. No, thank you so much, and I think there was so much really rich sort of advice and guidance there, and I'm sure it's going to prompt some really good Q&A sessions and later on down the line. So thank you very, very much indeed. No, and I think that advice about gaining broader experience around the law school, I would concur absolutely with that. And so moving on now to our second speaker, I'm delighted as well that Professor Caroline Hunter is here to speak to us. Caroline is professor at York Law School, where she's also currently head of school. Caroline started her career, perhaps, I might say more traditionally, in terms of that you were in private practice first as a barrister, but you developed there a very specialist practice, I understand, in housing and local government law. But before joining the University of York, Caroline worked at the Universities of Manchester, Sheffield Hallam and the University of Nottingham, so broad experience. And now Caroline's developed an academic profile that combines teaching, research, training and legal practice, focusing in particular on the interaction of housing law, policy and practice. So Caroline, we're really again looking forward to hearing about this, and I'm delighted to hand over to you.
Thank you very much and welcome. I'm going to share my screen because I've got some slides to share, so bear with me while I do that. I hope everybody can now see that. Okay, so finding my own path. Let me just move on. Okay, so I read the blurb for this talk and the email from Penny, and if I was a very positive person, I would say I would have focused on this successful in terms of these quotes, but actually it also made me worried. You know, what made me, or perhaps my career, out of the ordinary or unusual, and I want to reflect on that and what makes it not traditional. Before I start, I've got a couple of points I want to make. I have two grown-up children, and I think it has been not traditional for women, particularly if they have children, to be professors in law schools. I think that's beginning to change, but I think it's something we need to be mindful of. And the other thing I want to say is that I have a disability. This has happened more recently after I became a professor, but I had a major stroke in 2015. I was off for many months, and I still have aphasia. So from time to time, I literally cannot get the words out. So bear with me if that happens. But also, I want to say from that, it's amazing what you can do if you have support, both from your colleagues and also from your students. And I wouldn't have got better if I hadn't had that. So that's just a couple of things before I go and look about how I got to where I am today. So where to begin? So as Penny has said, I started it in a very normal way in some ways. I did a law degree, and here's a picture of me with my brother, just in case you're wondering who that is, getting my degree and graduating. But I think what was different for me was actually I absolutely did not want to be a lawyer of any sort, having finished my degree. I was completely put off by mostly, I have to say, the other students. So if they were posh, they were off to be barristers, and that was never going to be me as I saw it. Or they were off to the city with the city firms. And I didn't know that there were other ways of being lawyers. And I certainly could not see myself as one of those. Maybe that was my fault. I didn't really understand, when you're 21, you don't really know enough about the world to know there are other ways forward. So what did I do? Well, I went to do a bit more studying, because what else do you do when you don't know what to do with yourself? But I didn't do a PhD. And what I went off to do was to go to Sheffield to study housing just for a diploma. And you might think, why that? Well, I still wonder why that sometimes, but I think it's probably because my mum had been a housing officer before she got married, and she continued to work in the area when I was a child. In fact, I can remember people coming to our house to be interviewed to get a tenancy at a little housing association that she was in. She was secretary of, I think. Anyway, off I went to do this course, which I have to say completely changed my life, because I ended up getting a job because of it, and I worked for a independent housing advice centre in London, and that's a picture of where it was on the old Brompton Road. I think it's now flats now, of course, and I was doing telephone advice. And I suppose what was really important for me, and this echoes some of the things that Rosemary has said, is I found about life in a way that I don't think necessarily happens if you're always in the academic community all the time. So I had clients with real problems. It was scary, but it was a huge learning curve about how the law works for real people. We had cases on the Homelessness Act, about cases about tenancies and licenses, and it was a real. I learned how, as I say, the law works for real people. we had a lawyer there, and we also had access to barristers, and particularly one barrister, Andrew Arden, who was one of the people in the 70s who really started this idea that there was something called housing law, rather than property law or planning or whatever it might be. So that was really important for me to understand that there were other sorts of lawyers, I suppose. And what I've written in my notes here, that I've found my tribe. And I think sometimes that's important for us. We have to have a place in the world, and it doesn't necessarily have to be being an academic. It might be people who are interested in a particular area, and that I've had this tribe, some of whom are academics, some of whom practicing lawyers, all sorts of people, but who are really interested in housing and housing law. So that was a real eye-opener. And Andrew actually then asked me if I wanted to join him as a barrister. So off I went to bar school, did pupillage, and was in practice. But having said that, I didn't really like being in practice, mainly I think because of the court work. I like to take my time and think about things, and you can't do that in court, is my experience. But I really liked writing opinions and really having the time to think. Andrew wrote a lot, and what I was able to do was start to write. And I think if you're going to be an academic, generally, most places, you need to be writing. And actually that shows you can do it, even though you haven't done a PhD. You can get in the experience in other ways of writing, it seems to me. What also I did was I started doing a bit of teaching, and I think perhaps like Rosemary, I absolutely loved it. I really enjoyed teaching. It was at the LSE. They had a similar diploma as I'd taken it myself in Sheffield, and I taught housing law for them. And it was really important for me to think about, actually, if I'm teaching people who are, and they were nearly all part-time students in practice, how do you teach those sorts of people and make it real and practical for them? And that's been something that's been important for me in my teaching as I've gone through, that we can put that together. So moving on, I got to my next job, partly because I wanted to leave London, not to go there, which was about having children, of course. And I got a job back at what became Sheffield Hallam. But I think what was important for me was that I wasn't in a law department. It was their department of, I think it was called Urban and Regional Studies, but it was always changing its name, so it might not have been called that at that point, or it might never have been called that. I can't quite remember, it's such a long time ago. But what was important for me out of that was that the department was interdisciplinary, so lots of social sciences of all sorts, and that has influenced my idea of what law is in terms of research and writing. But I also managed to continue to write with Andrew and to begin to put together research bids. Okay, so as Penny has said, I've also worked at two other law departments, Manchester and Nottingham. And actually, I went from Sheffield to Nottingham, then back to Hallam. And it was that point where I was doing a lot of research. And one of the things that happened to me, and again, I think happens to women much more, I worked part-time as part of that. I job shared with Sarah Blandy, that some of you might know Sarah, but also that enabled me to use some of the other time to do funded research, doing lots of contracts for the government, sometimes for charities and so on. But what was important about all of that is that it was this interdisciplinary, I can't say that word, disciplinary, that's a hard word for me to say, with other colleagues. So Sarah was one of them, Judy Nixon was another, and the staff at Crazer at Hallam. So it was really important to have that sort of background in terms of colleagues to work with. And I think this model that is perhaps going about the sole researcher is not a good model. It's not good for us individually, but also you learn so much more by working with other people. So I wanted to say a little bit about doing other things. And again, this links a bit to some of the things that Rosemary said. You can get very narrow in terms of what you do as an academic. And so my way of dealing with that is to do lots of other things, all about housing, but through other things. So I've done lots of training over the years, particularly for organisations like LAG, and that has helped me as much as I hope it's helped the other people on the training, because again, it's a way of understanding what's really happening in the field for lawyers and housing officers. You know, how does the law work for them? I also kept a door tenancy for many years, taking a few advices from clients, and more recently I became a part-time judge at the Residential Property Tribunal. And I suppose for me, one of the things that's really important is, and I keep saying this, is working with people who have real problems, to understand what their problems are, and that informs what I do. But also, there's something about, as a lawyer, in practice that's slightly different from what we do as academics. And it's a bit hard to put my finger on what that is, but that I have a bit of a nerve that I have to scratch a bit in terms of being a lawyer, and sitting on the tribunal really helps that. And I'm just at the moment doing a few cases, and it's a different way of thinking, and it really, again, it's something that I can bring to my teaching. So finally, I get to being at York, which I have to say I absolutely love. I've been here 12 years, and which is longer than I've been anywhere else for work, and for 7 years I've been head of the department. So some reflections from all that. One reflection I've been thinking about is, do you need a PhD? More and more we say you have to have one, and I wonder if that's always a good thing, for some of the reasons that Rosemary has talked about. So maybe it'd be interesting to hear what other people think about that. Do you need to have a career plan? I have to say I never had one, and certainly not to be a professor. So how important is that? A lot of what happens in our careers is often happenstance, it seems to me, and it's hard to make plans. I've done it in a very there's a word I can't say. I've written it down, but I can't say it. Circuitous way. I've been part-time and full-time. I've actually gone up and down the scale in terms of whether I was a lecturer or a senior lecturer. So not only up but down, because I preferred to go back to Hallam because I preferred the work there. So again, is it really important to have this big idea of where we're going to? And Rosemary spoke about that, and certainly we get asked, where are we trying to get to? But I think the world changes so much so quickly at the moment, and often opportunities come which you're not expecting. So it's hard to plan, and maybe it doesn't matter as much as we think. I think it is important to have a clear focus of interest as an academic, and I'm sure that happens with everybody. But within that, I think you need to have variety. It's very easy to just have that very narrow idea of what being an academic is all about. And I absolutely agree with what Rosemary says about having a wide, do lots of things. And then the last thing that I really wanted to say is you cannot get or have a really successful career without working with great colleagues. So not perhaps about mentoring as itself, but actually you will be working with people, and you have to work out how to do that really well. Find the people who are also interested in your things, work with them, and essentially whatever your pathway to success is, it's never just your own success. I think I'll stop there and I'll stop sharing.
Oh, thank you so much, Caroline. I think we were slightly distracted there just at the end when Rosemary's cat came centre stage. But look, full centre stage now.
Very sorry.
No, it's lovely. An extra participant is always very welcome. And thank you so much, Caroline, for sharing. And I think there was so much there, such a broad range career. But I think the essence of the idea of advocacy as an academic, but advocacy in its very broadest sense, helping other people. And I think, again, similarly to what you said, Rosemary, the idea of a career plan will just embrace opportunities and enjoy the work you do. And I think that's a salutary lesson, because I think everyone can focus very hard on, trying to make the next grade and the next grade and the next grade, and that becomes the whole focus. Well, thank you so much to both of you. And now on to our third speaker. It's Kevin Banton. Now, Kevin has shared with me his biography. I'm going to try, Kevin, and whip through it. There's a lot here, but in the lot here, that's really good as well, because it's a very broad-ranging career. So Kevin began his career. So he's had a very interesting path to professor. Began his career as a financial services litigation assistant. Was then recruited as British Council Legal Education Advisor before becoming legal advisor to the Foreign Office Overseas Development. I hope I'm remembering this correctly. He was then headhunted as UN Political Affairs Special Constitutional Advisor, then went back to the FCO. Following that, he was a research fellow at the Department of Government in Leeds University, before then joining the new University of Derby law team as a lecturer. But because that didn't keep him busy enough, alongside all of this, he had many other roles. So he ran European Commission projects. He was also a higher education advisor to Nottingham Postgraduate Medical School, where he ended up running national primary care training for prison doctors. He was a Police Federation strategic advisor, then an independent scrutineer for CPS. Did you ever sleep, Kevin? If we go on, he's held lots of advisory roles in policing, security and intelligence, then led to him setting up the law school at Derby. He was then appointed professor, then director of the Policing Institute, before moving to DMU as head of law and professor of public law. And then finally, although I don't think it probably really is finally, Kevin sort of left higher education this year to become the chief executive officer of a scientific charity. And as part of that, he was part of the finalist team of the Most Influential Leaders in Health and Safety 2020. So, Kevin, again, we can't wait to hear more. There's so much I suspect that you're going to be telling us. So thank you. Over to you.
Well, it's lovely to be speaking to you. I apologise for the rather dodgy video. My computer decided to die immediately before this. And I could have listened to the previous speakers at great length because they are so inspiring. What wonderful people. I'm so sad that in my academic career I didn't get to work with either of them. And I guess they've also said a lot of the really, really good stuff. So I've got to find something interesting and useful. So I won't pretend anything other than the fact that I'm what I call a genetic lawyer. I had an Indian mum, and I was the second child, so that kind of, before I was even born, I was lined up to do something with law. And when it's later showed that I didn't have any kind of motor skills or anything like that, so surgeon was out, it was going to be law. And it certainly wasn't what I envisaged for myself. And I went to study law as an undergraduate, probably spent more time in the philosophy department in the bar, might be like a lot of legal academics, and left and didn't really want to do anything to do with law, but for reasons that too circuitous, ended up doing a job in financial services litigation after clearing up the mess after the crash that some of you will be old enough to remember in financial services. And everything since then has been pure luck. And that would be the number one thing I'd say about the finding your own path. I think there are some impressive people I've worked with who kind of have this vision of where they'll be, how they'll get there. They have this drive and determination, and they know that they are going to be a professor and a sort of vice chancellor and that kind of thing. And I admire them beyond all measure, because these are people who, quite young, or maybe a bit older, just decide that that's what they want and they're going to go for it. And their path is one that they kind of hack out through the mangrove swamps of academic politics and all of that kind of thing. And then you get the sort of creatures who are, sort of slink through the forest because they're just so adept and they sort of find their way. And the previous two speakers, goodness knows, you can tell that these are people who put them in any situation. They've just got that natural charisma and capability that is going to draw them towards, a kind of a leadership role. And then you get the sort of likes of me who are just lucky, who sort of the path is just one sort of where you sort of make a decision and it takes you to somewhere else and it takes you to somewhere else. But I mean, luck is a major factor in all of this. Now, where you happen to get your first job may determine how easy or difficult path is, who you happen to be working with, who you happen to speak to, the person you choose to talk to at the bar in the conference. And for me, it was a matter of luck that the Conservative government in the 90s decided they hated the civil service because they were all sort of remarkably sort of Oxford and Cambridge and genericists, etc. And they advertised for someone who was a specialist at a really, really low salary to do stuff to do with legal education and legal development. And I jumped for that role. And that's one of those things. Luck is not necessarily something that happens to you. I think you make a bit of your own luck in the sense of there are always really interesting opportunities around you. And there's always that question, should I do this? Or should I just focus on the plan? And for me, I've never been able to focus on the plan. The opportunities are always too interesting. There's always something fascinating that you want to get engaged with. And you just I can't sort of resist these things. And if I've done a lot, it's because of the inability to resist something that's really interesting. Later on in my career, when I've been assisting other people with their professional development, one of the things I observed is that sometimes, against the advice that I've been giving them about, being a bit focused and, the type of stuff that you're supposed to tell people, the people who've done really quite well have also just sort of said, well, it's an opportunity. I really like the look of this. I'm going to give it a go anyway. And actually, that has been one of those facilitating things. So as luck will have it, picking up on good fortune, but also picking up on opportunity. And the great thing about being a lawyer or someone with a legal background or legal knowledge is all of the world is in the law. And everything is in the law. Now, law is that kind of as a language to communicate with virtually any discipline. And it's amazing how many people are really interested in the legal perspective. And that's not, what's the law about it, but how do lawyers think about things? And I think there's something unique and valuable about that, which enables us to communicate with other people in a way that is probably engenders a level of trust in a strange kind of way that is beyond what is merited. And I got pulled into the UN because again, it's a lucky thing. I happened to be out on mission for the Foreign Office and bumped into a bunch of UN really, really, really clever dudes who were doing a piece of emergency work in a state that I was doing a piece of sort of political work in. And a few of their members just weren't cutting it and they needed a bit of help. And it wasn't really my job, but it's in a hotel, finish my work, etc. I'll sit down in the bar and chat through and try and work through stuff with the UN team and see whether I can help them. And the English legal perspective is remarkable. These were all also continental and American lawyers, and they just didn't think about things in the same way as I'd been sort of trained to do. And I learned a huge amount from them. But at the end of that, the sort of Assistant Secretary General had got collared by the head of the Human Rights Centre, who happened to be on that mission, and said, we need this guy to come out to help with this particular problem. And my boss in the Foreign Office said, you're not going anywhere. You've got a 3 months notice period, even if you want to leave, and we're not going to second you. And it was the funniest thing, I think, of my career to be fought over. And ultimately it was between the minister, who just basically said, you're going out there because the UN wants you, and it's British interest. And it really fascinating. And nothing to do with really any kind of great ability. It was just that thing. And it's the same thing, I think, that colleagues have been saying about in law school, just helping out, being willing to sort of pitch in a bit, and even sort of saying, well, I don't know everything about this, but I'll put some effort in. And I think that's really important. And when I came back out of the UN, and goodness knows that the health conditions weren't brilliant in the UN, so it chewed me up a little bit. When I came back out and into the Foreign Office, we were looking at how to systematise the development of law internationally, how to really improve things. And I found myself writing lots and lots of guidance, that it's all in the training and education. This is, law is not in books, it's in people and in practices, and education, training, that's where it is. And I wrote so much about that I ended up persuading myself of it. I think, and I suppose that what I think I'd learned from that was that actually I didn't know very much. I got exposed to amazing people, great parties, but also worked with some of the most amazing people, from sort of Michael Kirby through to Nicholas Phillips, a whole litany of really, really brilliant people. I remember going to meetings in the basement of Charles Claw House. As Carl may remember that there used to be this wonderful thing, the Comparative Law Subcommittee of the British Institute of International and Comparative Law, and there's like these incredibly brilliant people, William Wade, and guys like, and they're all talking about this really clever law stuff that I never learned at law school. If I did, I didn't really notice it, and I realised there was so much to learn. And I figured that going back into sort of legal education might be a way of learning stuff. And I think that at the heart of a good career is that notion, not of what you know and what you're certain about, but what you have to learn, and how, working with other people, doing different projects, picking up things is a means to just further that learning, to get further through that. And I'm also a bit of a sucker for a lost cause. I'm sorry. I can't resist when you see something and you think, bloody hell, that's looking sort of problematic. I wonder whether I can help. And maybe that's because I just don't have a lot of confidence that I'm going to be able to sort of, deal with big and competitive things. I don't know. But when I joined the law school, well, the law school didn't exist at Derby. There was a law degree that had just been started up at the new University of Derby. And Derby had been a higher education college and was at Polytechnic for 20 minutes, quite literally, just in order to sort of jump up. And like a lot of universities then, and probably now, the idea, well, let's run a law course because that's a way you can get students and make a bit of cash and that kind of thing. And at the back of that there is this thing about universities and law schools, that there's a kind of a love-hate relationship with them. They're like the sort of the naughty, precocious child that you kind of got to have because they make you money and they sort of pile up high, sell them cheap, and law sounds really quite sort of groovy and all of that kind of thing. But at the same time, they really don't know what to do with legal academics because they don't sort of do stats and sort of or match stats, and they don't do sort of the same research methods. And legal academics think in a different way, and they're bloody argumentative, and they can pull holes in all the governance systems. And so law schools have a real problem, and lawyers and legal academics have a bit of a problem because they're always slightly outsiders, I feel. I might be wrong, maybe I've just experienced the wrong institutions, but there is a kind of a love-hate relationship. And I think that does slightly tar the academic who wants to be a professor or whatever. You're more likely to be valued for your legal skills than you are your legal research, simply because a lot of people don't understand legal research methods. And that is a problem when you have university-based committees who are trying to evaluate the impact of stuff, or measure it, or sort of even make sense of it and where it fits in. But boy, oh boy, what I would say is loving law, and you might think, well, Kevin, you've left law behind. I haven't really, but you've left law behind. How can you say love law? But I mean, I absolutely adore law in all of its forms. There's some that I wouldn't want to spend too much time sleeping with, but there's most of it, when you get down to it, is just so fantastically interesting. And I think that passion for the subject and the ability to convey a genuine love of it and what its value is, even transcends your inabilities. And I was a rubbish lecturer. I really, really wasn't very good at all. I wasn't a brilliant teacher, but I was always really keen. I was always really enthusiastic about it. And I wanted other people to share that enthusiasm. And I think it's not just in teaching, but I think teaching is such an important part of legal education and British universities that, I mean, you occasionally bump into academics who sort of say, well, God, I need to get this research project so I can get out of teaching. And I get it. Yeah, I get sort of, that you really, really love your research. You don't want to spend any time doing anything else. But boy, I think you lose something along the way. And I think you lose something that is important to professing the subject if the means by which you profess the subject is purely in academic papers and conferences. Because I don't think you ever really get to grips with the subject in a meaningful way if you can't communicate it on all levels. And some of the amazing people I've worked with in law are just brilliant communicators. And the amount of really, really good law professors who say exactly what was said earlier. Don't be afraid of the core module, because actually, I can remember I probably spent too long teaching public law, even while managing and doing other things. But I remember just every lecture standing up and sort of trying to explain constitutional principles and make sense of them to other people. And they're thinking, aha, so that's it. And I've written constitutions, I've worked with constitutional teams, and it's still clicking because you're explaining it and re-explaining it, etc. So I do think that loving law is really important, but loving to teach it, I think, is invaluable. And to be honest, one of the legs that I got my professorship for at Derby wasn't because of my brilliant legal research. Don't go looking for it, you won't find it. You can find my dead hand in hundreds of pieces of legislation and a few constitutions, but not in anything worth reading in an academic journal. I respect people who can do that clever stuff. I'm sort of a bit more workaday. But learning and teaching, I did a few things around, and most of that was because I realised that as an individual, I lacked the capabilities of being a good teacher, and I probably needed some help by thinking about systems, about processes, strategies, etc., to compensate for the lack of ability to really get things across in the way that I wanted to. And so, bits and bobs of innovation. And that's back to that learning thing. You never stop learning. And go and learn stuff that you need to. And I was fortunate to think, well, okay, I'll learn how to use computers and stuff like that, etc. I'm looking over here because I've got a little aid memoir, so I don't go too far off tangent. At Derby, law was there to, and I don't mean to be nasty, but it was there to make money, to make the numbers. We did have some good researchers, and then we had a bit of a financial crisis, and they sacked everyone who had a PhD and the professors. It was the night of the long knives. It was the year that the university described academics as the unit of resource. It was the most sort of Orwellian experience you could imagine. And I think that was quite interesting, because that sort of keyed into something else in me, because I was doing a lot of things on the side, because anything interesting comes along. Oh, that's interesting. I'll go over the road to Nottingham University and help them with prison medicine or whatever. And that was a really brutal experience. And a lot of my friends were, their lives were ruined by that. And that reminded me of something quite important. And a lot of colleagues were saying, well, we need to do something about this. And we were kind of almost a little anarchic self-governing collective, because nobody could manage us because we were all so bloody mad. And no, people didn't hang around. And in the end, the next thing came in, which was, now, someone's got to put their head above the parapet and do some leadership to just help us out of this state where law wasn't being taken seriously. We were the law nothing. We weren't, we were a subject group within the business school. And someone's got to do something for our students to get them recognition, to build some research, because a university without research isn't really a university, and a university department without research is being disabled from having credibility and a voice. I'm not saying you can't be a brilliant teacher without being a researcher. I'm saying that research is part of the lifeblood of a law school. And so I kind of jumped into a leadership role. How I got the job was in an open forum. The dean at the time said, "What sort of university are we?" And I said, "Badly managed," at which point I got the tap on the shoulder, and I thought, I'll better dust off my CV. But in fairness to the dean, she sort of said, well, one, what's wrong? And two, can you sort of do better? And I think that was that brings to the issue to leadership. The last thing I'd say, and leadership was the basis on which I basically got the second strand of my professorship. So it's teaching, learning, and leadership. The kind of the last point is I left being a professor. I don't miss being a professor. I love what I'm doing. I've done more judicial reviews in the last few years, a few months than I have done. I've been right at the heart of the COVID crisis. I look back on time in academic life, and the L's are the things. Lawyer skills are wonderful. Engage in leadership. Love the law. You're always learning. A lot of it's got to do with luck. The other thing is, don't look for the short term. Look for lasting impact. So that's me, I think.
Well, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. And I think if we could teach our students nothing other than that law is not in books, it's in people, I think we could consider ourselves to have a job well done. I'm going to hand over now to Carl, because I'm sure that there's going to be a whole load of very interesting questions and answers coming forward from this hugely interesting talk this evening. Carl, over to you.
Thank you very much. And our audience members are welcome to submit questions, which I will moderate. The first question I would like to ask, thank you to all our speakers, because you really fantastically met the brief for tonight, which was to talk about your own path and the wider experiences that you've had and which you bring to your careers. A question to start, and whoever cares to answer, or all of you can answer. Has that wider experience always been institutionally valued? Has it sometimes been institutionally devalued in what you've done? Has it been understood and recognized within an institutional context?
Shall I say something?
Sure.
To start with, one thing I would say is there's a difference between the institution, and particularly as they get bigger and bigger, and your kind of cohort of colleagues who you're working with. So I always felt, I think, that I was always valued what I did with the people I worked with and around, but sometimes the institution doesn't always value that. And I think some of that is about different universities have different processes in terms of promotion, and my experience between new universities and old universities is that, you know, for new universities, you really only get promoted if you're moving up in terms of management, and that doesn't necessarily link to what you're doing. So that's one issue, I think, for me. I think that probably is enough to say for the moment.
Yes, well, I agree with what Caroline says. And I do think it varies from institution to institution, and indeed from manager to manager. I mean, law schools are very different, and different people within them are different. And I do think it's a bit of a pity that the promotions procedures are becoming so formalized now, so tick box. I mean, when I look, and of course, any of us who have got here this way look at these things and think they wouldn't even appoint me to a lectureship now, you often think. But I think also that from the mentoring point of view, a good mentor can help you to shape your experience on your CV and your statement to make it more relevant, I think. And if you don't get the job, then they wouldn't have appreciated you anyway. But I do actually think there is a culture of not appreciating anything but first-class research that's developing. And I do think that's a great worry. A lot of us don't do first-class research or don't do it all the time. And there's this huge pressure, I think, on young staff to the extent that they think that is what matters. It is only that matters, that everything else is subsidiary. And I think they would think that then the other experience is a bit superfluous or unnecessary. But I think we have to change that culture, and I think we probably can if we get into positions of power and show how important wider experience is, because really the proof is in the pudding. It's how people actually behave in post. And in my experience, the people with the wide experience are actually much more flexible, much more able to fill in, much more able to rise to the situation, whatever it is, you know, and then they probably end up doing quite good research as well.
Kevin.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. My view is that our stories are all stories that are in the history, but everything's in the future, isn't it? Now, when you do something, you don't know what spark that is going to ignite. You don't know what relevance it's going to have or the resonance that it's going to have in the future. And our role is about forming the future. Yes, there are some very narrow-minded and managerial people who take a checklist approach to things. Fortunately, there are also some really, really broad-minded, visionary people in the mix. And there's an element of luck to who values what. The important thing is that it's valued to you and it's part of your narrative and part of your story. But I would agree with what Rosemary said. Sometimes it's how you present things that actually is the obstacle, that you don't see it as part of a narrative. And I have to say, I got some really good help from colleagues in pulling together quite a chaotic life history to make a narrative that was really interesting for myself. So I think if you value it, do it, because actually it might be the thing that other people value in the future. You might be ahead of the curve. Yeah. But use mentors and that kind of thing to help you structure that in terms of your life story.
It reminds me of a comment I made once in saying that my career has not been linear. And the response was, oh, it's linear. It's just not a straight line, which I thought was one way to put it. There's an interesting comment from our audience about the PhD, which is something that's come up in your talks, really about how this is a product of a particular the times. At one time, it was quite rare to have a PhD. Now it's increasingly seems to be a requirement. So I thought that was an interesting theme that ran through the talks. I wonder also to ask a question. Any reflections you might have on what's happened not only to law schools but to universities in recent times? It's sometimes described as the neoliberalism of the university, and the extent to which perhaps one of the downsides has been how people may feel they have to, meet that kind of impossible tick box of what they have to do to become successful. And I do wonder whether some would regard the experiences that you've had as a luxury now, that they just aren't allowed in this kind of neoliberal world of higher education.
Can I make a comment? And this is, remembering relatively recently trying to support the promotion of others to professorial and leadership posts. And I think you're right that in the scramble to be almost egalitarian, you end up treating everybody as if they should be a certain format, follow a certain type of route, or have a certain type of characteristic. And I think lawyers already don't naturally fall into those. PhDs in law are still rarer than they are in maybe other disciplines. But there is, I think, a danger that people don't understand the unique nature of an individual's journey. That being said, I think, again, this is where mentoring, this is what Rosemary is saying, this is where being able to help people to understand difference is really important. Perversely, I do think that the equality agenda, in the way in which it's rolled out by HR departments, can have the inverse effect of actually being discriminatory against those people who have a less traditional route. And again, mentoring and helping people to understand is part of that problem. But it's also part of the solution.
No, it's completely true, isn't it, what you say, Carl? It was a luxury for our generation in lots of ways, although in other ways it wasn't. I mean, it was quite hard for women to get into law schools when I did. It's always been, I think, probably a bit hard for ethnic minorities. So, there are different obstacles at each stage. I think some of those obstacles still exist, actually. I think it is actually, and the pandemic this year has shown it, it's actually harder for some groups to tick the boxes that are now required. I would get rid of those boxes. I really would. I think they're just becoming increasingly formalized in ways that take over people's lives, actually. And it's no wonder that we have people taking on jobs they're not genuinely interested in and don't do very well because they know they have to have this role or that role or produce this or produce that. And they have to prioritize in order to tick all those boxes. I preferred the days when you had fairly loose job specifications and person specs, and I would much prefer that, actually. That's why I think it's often easier to get a job somewhere else than to get promotion in your own institution. I certainly found that.
Okay. We have a question specifically for Caroline. This is interesting because it's kind of the mirror image question, and that concerns going from legal academia to possibly becoming a barrister. And Caroline, having gone the other way, have you any comments on that academic barrister relationship, but coming at it from the other direction, as it were?
Well, I think we are seeing more of it. I think we see more of it in London because it's much easier to do two things in London in doing practice and teaching. And I know that I have colleagues in London who are academics who are going that way. Although I also know some who are elsewhere who've done that as well. And I think it's my experience of being at a Chambers is that they were actually interested in people who had a bit more experience than people coming straight out of university, bar school, and then finding pupillage. So if people had done more interesting things and then were applying for pupillage, that definitely was a good thing, and I think that would include being an academic. So definitely I've seen it happening, and the question is, do you want to go completely to the other side, as it were, or can you do both? And I think it's easier than it used to be to do both in some ways. I say easier, I suspect there was a time when law schools had lots of barristers who came in, and all the lectures were in the evening, or indeed when I was a student, Saturday mornings. They used to have people coming from the bar to teach and so on. So that relationship has been come and gone over time, I suspect. And I see quite a lot of it at the moment of people I know who are going back to being barristers as well as coming the other way. I suspect it might have got harder for people to come into academic work now for the things we've been talking about, not having a PhD and so on. So, yeah. And one other thing while I'm here thinking about is we're talking about research a lot. We at York, we have a number of colleagues who are teaching and scholarship colleagues, and they are really important in the department. And actually this it goes back to the stuff you were saying, Carl, about can you do everything now, or actually do we need to can you currently now be brilliant at research and teaching and doing admin? And I think it's getting harder and harder because we ask more from each person, and therefore you need more TNS staff who might do some of the admin, particularly running the programs, that sort of thing, who have that expertise in that. While your staff who may be ART staff are still doing your teaching, and I absolutely agree with Rosemary that everybody should be, and I try to get all of my staff are teaching on something on our core subjects in the undergraduate degree, because I think that is so important that everybody is involved in that. But, I think then doing research at the right level that expected, and then, for example, running admissions, it's almost impossible. And I think for that reason, we'll get more and more staff who are perhaps TNS, and we should value them, and we need to think about how we value them really well. And there's a career for them as well.
That leads nicely into a comment and a question from me, which concerns career tracks, which are always seem to be called something slightly different in each institution, making it more. But the idea of dual tracks, one being research and teaching, one being education and scholarship. And on the plus side, I think universities have done a lot of good work over the past few years in creating teaching and scholarship tracks with career progression up to professor. I think it gets more murky at the very top as to sort of how professorial zones might be track on to the teaching and scholarship route. So fair play to universities for creating the routes. One thing that concerns me, and I thought of this during your presentations, is whether the person who's good at a number of different things can actually be disadvantaged by these clear-cut career tracks. Because I would have, to my mind, what your careers have all shown is, and I don't know whether it's to do with personality or an ability, obviously, none of you will stick to a track. You kind of move between different things. You won't be disciplined by tracks, which may well be difficult in a kind of track system. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think, Carl, I think it makes perfect sense. And I think what's the devil's in the detail in these career tracks. It's not that there's a sort of, no, it's quite right that there's a separate and distinct celebration of teachers and researchers, because it's very hard to be outstanding at both. I mean, the modern university doesn't make that easy. But it's the detail in terms of how that is then specified, and what levels of achievement need to be reached in particular things, and the balanced scorecard sort of managerial type of approach. And have different tracks which recognise different valuable strengths, but the over detailed managerial approach, I think, militates, and it ends up with people having to tick off achievements in order to move up, and that means that they've not got space to do other things, maybe that belong to teaching or to research or to administration. That's a great shame, because universities, I think, thrive on diversity and diversity of experience and skills, and I think it undermines the strength of a law school to have overly specified tracks.
Yeah, there are real problems with it. Having said it's a good thing, there are also problems from me. For example, just a really simple thing. So we have a system called Pure, which is where our publications sit and so on. Well, our research our teaching and scholarships staff are not allowed to put their publications on it because they don't, they're not being judged for ref, and it's used for ref purposes. And they feel rightly, because they are publishing, some of them, particularly about legal education, that's not right. And I agree with them, but I cannot get that changed because that's a university decision and so on. And I just think that sort of thing that sets those barriers up are a real problem. And how do you get people who you think, well, actually, they're really interested in some research stuff. Can I move them off from one track to the other? Because actually I'm looking at what they're doing and where they want to get to, and it's really hard to get people across tracks. And largely what we find from ref, it seems to me, although I would say this hasn't happened at York, but I've seen it elsewhere. And before I was at York, people who aren't very good at doing research are put onto a teaching track, but they're not very good at teaching either. And actually that's just a bad way of not dealing with a HR issue. People who are on that track for teaching should be excellent teachers and administrative programs and that sort of thing. So we need to absolutely be aware of that.
It seems to me that the answer is to get rid of the ref, and that may happen anyway. And then we won't have this terrific push. And we'll go back to the situation that existed when I first joined the law school, which was that a few people did research because they enjoyed doing it, and they did whatever they wanted, and people were pleased, but it wasn't scored. And, lots of the really distinguished people of the generation just before me were people who are incredibly distinguished, but didn't produce a lot of articles, maybe did the textbook or whatever. I think they think the idea is we're not going to be as productive, and we won't be as productive probably. But what we do will probably be just as good. And speaking of moving from tracks, Reading does encourage moving from tracks, and it does happen. But the whole idea that you should have these tracks is ridiculous. We've got a teaching intensive colleague whose research is better than quite a lot of the teaching and research people. It just doesn't make sense. A lot of the research people are better teachers than the others. What we should be doing, I think, is not scoring like this, but we have to because we're chasing the money. And that, of course, comes back to the neoliberal bit that Carl was talking about.
Well, and I think even if we get rid of the ref, we're still going to have sort of global league tables where everyone is trying to. That's a bigger issue about how you escape from neoliberalism if you can. I mean, I must say that CHULS has been doing some thinking about the challenges around promotions for those on teaching and scholarship tracks, and how we can support those colleagues. Because one of the issues is, although, again, great to have the track, but in many institutions, the track has been modeled on a particular kind of research academic. So the teaching and scholarship promotion application needs assessors from other institutions, which can be challenging. So CHULS has thought about trying to create a list of people who would be happy to help with providing assessment of teaching and scholarship applications, because it can be quite difficult to find suitable people to do those. And I have to share a story about one institution, which will be nameless, where promotions on a teaching and scholarship track required the head of school to find assessors who had to be outstanding researchers, that those were the only assessors that would be considered appropriate, even for assessing someone who wasn't applying for promotion on the basis of research. So it shows you there are a lot of issues to be dealt with still. I want to conclude with a question from our audience, which does have to do with research. And that question is, I don't know who would like to answer, but how do you come up with ideas? Which is, where do your ideas come from?
I'll start. I never have a problem with that. And I think that's because I'm working with and know people and talking to people who are in the field, as it were, whether they're lawyers or housing advisors or whatever. And I think, oh, that's interesting. Why is that happening that way? Oh, I can find out about it. So I never find it a problem, but you have to be involved with those sort of people to work out what's going on in the real world. And then you get ideas about, oh, I want to research that.
Okay. Well, I think on that note, that highlights the importance of getting out when we can get out again, and talking to people and being involved, which is one of the themes from this evening. So that brings us to the end of tonight's workshop. I would like to thank our guests for a really fascinating, interesting, informative workshop. It was a great combination of a personal experience, but also much more than personal experience as well. I want to thank also Penny for chairing tonight's proceedings. And finally, I want to thank our audience for your contribution. And as director of IALS, I hope that you'll join us again soon at IALS for more online events. Full details can be found on our website. In the meantime, thank you again for coming. It is good night from the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies in London. Good night.